Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone. And thanks for coming tonight at dinner time. I'm Kate Kelly with Lewis Creek Association, and we are here to present the results of our aquatic invasive species stewardship program from this past summer. We had boat launch stewards stationed at Bristol Pond and Monkton Ponds. And so I have Matt Gorton here, who's a conservation biologist who we hired this summer to sort of lead the program and train the stewards at the two ponds. Matt is also a member of the Ferrisburgh Conservation Commission. So just FYI, we got some good locals here. And I guess with that, I'll let Matt take it away.
Sounds good. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right. Can everybody see that? Awesome. So like Kate said, my name is Matt Gorton, and I was contracted by LCA to oversee their boat launch steward program this year. I also oversaw it last year as well. Last year, the program was only located at Bristol Pond, and due to that success, we decided to expand it to Monkton Pond this past summer. So in this presentation, I'll give a brief overview of what aquatic invasive species are, how to prevent their spread, and some of the details about our program. So aquatic invasive species are non-native, and they cause damage to the environment, the economy, or human health. And they can choke out our waterways, killing off other species and preventing waterfowl from landing. This first photo was taken in the southern portion of Lake Champlain, and it's just showing a dense water chestnut mat. And aquatic invasive species can also cause damage to infrastructure, which can lead to millions of dollars in repairs. And this photo is just showing the impact that zebra mussels can have on water pipes. And as you can see, the zebra mussels have formed a nearly impenetrable barrier to water movement through the pipe. And then lastly, aquatic invasive species often prevent recreational activities such as swimming, fishing, and boating. And that picture on the bottom, I believe I pulled off of a website. Looks like I forgot to put the citation there, but that's kind of what our program focused on, was the aquatic invasive species that could be found on watercraft. So humans are responsible for the rapid spread of aquatic invasive species and via the introduction of non-native species from other countries or regions into water bodies where they lack natural predators and competitors that would normally keep them in check. And humans are also responsible for disrupting the balance of native ecosystems by changing environmental conditions, which may make it easier for invasive species to invade. Stream sedimentation, ditching, building roads, and building dams will disturb native species, which make it easier for invasive species to invade those disturbed areas. And the easiest way that aquatic invasive species are spread from water body to water body is due to human recreation, and this occurs by people not removing invasive plants or animals from their boats and releasing their unused baits into the water. And it's also really important to remember that even native species can become invasive if you transport them to an ecosystem where they don't naturally occur. So it's extremely important to remove all plants and animals, regardless if they're native or not, from your watercraft and equipment. So typically when an aquatic invasive species invasion occurs, biodiversity can severely be reduced. And according to the state of Montana, around 42% of the species on the federal threatened or endangered species list are at risk primarily because of invasive species. And many invasive species function as ecosystem engineers, meaning that they significantly alter the environment that they invaded. For example, zebra mussels are small organisms that rapidly reproduce and severely alter the food chain and the clarity of water. And they do this by feeding on microscopic plants called plankton and microscopic animals called zooplankton, which significantly reduces food supply for native organisms. So zebra mussels may be making it easier for invasive species to spread into deeper waters by allowing the sunlight to penetrate the deeper water, which will allow them to grow. And this is kind of an interesting photo of zebra mussels preventing a native clam in Minnesota from being able to open. Oops. So the first invasive species that I'm going to talk about is European frogbit. And this is found in Bristol Pond, not Monkton Pond. And it's native to Europe and Asia, and it was introduced to North America in the 1930s. And frogbit forms these thick mats in still to slow-moving water. In this photo, you can see an example of that. This was taken at Bristol Pond over by the dock. And these mats decrease water oxygen and light levels, killing native plants and animals, and they negatively impact waterfowl and fish feeding and their movements. And from a more human-centric perspective, they also significantly reduce recreational activities by becoming ensnared in boat props. And frogbit is a fast-growing, free-floating plant that is often found among native water lilies. It does look similar to some of our lilies, but it has some distinct characteristics. For instance, it has these small, leathery, heart-shaped leaves that are between 1/2 inch to 2.25 inches across. When it's in bloom, frogbit produces these quite pretty 3-petaled white flowers. And frogbit's able to spread rapidly and easily by use of horizontal runners, which are referred to as stolons. And these stolons form clones of the mother plant. And frogbit is also able to survive the winter by forming turions. And these turions sink to the bottom of the lake or pond, and then they rise to the surface in the spring, forming new plants. So it's extremely important to harvest frogbit before it's able to form these turions. And the next species we're going to talk about is Eurasian Watermilfoil. And this is found at both Monkton Pond and Bristol Pond. And it's native to Europe, Africa, and Asia. And it was introduced to North America in the late 1800s. I believe the first infestations were in the Chesapeake Bay area. And like frogbit, it also forms thick mats in still to slow moving water up to 20 feet deep. And these mats also decrease water oxygen levels and light levels, killing native plants and animals. They also negatively impact fish feeding and movement. And some studies have shown that it prevents fish from spawning as well, or at least spawning successfully. And they also ensnare boat props, making boating extremely difficult, and they can also make fishing extremely frustrating as well. And then, but there are native milfoils that are beneficial. However, Eurasian watermilfoil does look a little different. Eurasian watermilfoil is a rooted submerged plant that has green feather-like leaves and white to reddish stems. These leaves typically are arranged in whorls of 4, and each leaf has a central axis with 12 to 21 leaflet pairs. And Eurasian watermilfoil does produce seeds. However, it is more successful at reproducing via plant fragmentation. And then there's curly-leaf pondweed, which is native to Europe, Africa, Australia, and Asia. And it was introduced to North America in the 1860s via California, I believe. It also forms thick mats in slow-moving water up to 13 feet deep. It reproduces very similarly to frogbit by the use of turions. And it's able to outcompete other plants because it grows earlier in the spring, and which allows them to prevent the other plants from getting light. And like I said, they also form dense mats that impede fish movement and ensnare boat props. Currently, curly pondweed is found only at Monkton Pond and not Bristol Pond. And we're hoping to keep that way. Now, curly pondweed is also a rooted submerged plant that varies in color from olive green to reddish brown. And the leaves are quite distinctive. I like to think of them as looking like lasagna. And they are arranged alternately on the stem. And the stem does vary in color, but if you look for those lasagna-like leaves, it's pretty easy to determine that it is curly leaf pondweed. And as I mentioned before, curly leaf pondweed reproduces similarly to frogbit via the use of turnins. And then we also have brittle naiad. This was found for the first time this year at Bristol Pond. It is not currently found in Monkton Pond. We did find it on a few boats this year, and it does seem that there is a small infestation over by the dock at Bristol Pond. And it also forms dense mats in still water up to 13 feet. And like the other plants, these mats decrease oxygen levels in the water. And brittle naiad also grows earlier than other plants, which allows them to block sunlight from getting to the native plants. And it also negatively impacts fish and waterfowl movement and ensnares boat props. Now, it's a rooted submerged plant that is bushy in appearance. Its coloration can vary from green to green-brown, but the leaves are typically thick and stiff with serrated edges and pointed tips. And their leaves curve downward and grow in pairs that are oppositely arranged along the stem at the nodes. And I think this one's quite safe. We do have native naiads as well, but this one seems to be quite distinctive. Now, the most effective way to combat invasive species is to prevent their spread to other bodies of water. So it's always important to remember to clean, drain, and dry your boat, your equipment, your shoes, and life jackets when you leave any body of water. So now I'm going to discuss the boat launch steward program at Bristol and Monkton Ponds. The boat launch stewards were typically at the ponds Fridays through Sundays between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. This did vary sometimes due to weather or other unforeseen circumstances. And while performing their duties, the boat launch stewards would record the watercraft type, the group size, the state of registration, if the visitor was launching or retrieving their watercraft, the time of inspection, if the boater had any previous contact with a boat launch steward, if the visitor accepted or refused the inspection, if the visitor took any aquatic invasive species spread prevention steps, what species were found on the watercraft, the last water body visited in 2 weeks prior to the inspection, and what water body the visitor would go to next if they were retrieving. So this year, the boat launch stewards interacted with 425 watercraft at Bristol Pond and 173 watercraft at Monkton Pond. And of all of these interactions rather, only 24 individuals refused to have their watercraft inspected for aquatic invasive species. And most of the interactions occurred in July. The vast majority of boaters at both ponds were kayakers followed by motorboats. And the vast majority of boaters were from Vermont, but we did have visitors coming from as far away as Arizona. And interestingly, as you can see from the graph, the vast majority of visitors did take aquatic invasive species spread prevention measures before visiting Bristol Pond, while approximately 64% of visitors took aquatic invasive species spread prevention measures before visiting Monkton Pond. Last year at Bristol Pond, it wasn't quite the same ratio. There was definitely less people than this year who were taking aquatic invasive species spread prevention measures. And I believe next year at Monkton Pond, we will probably have more people taking these measures because we interacted with these people this year. Now, most watercraft didn't have any aquatic plants on them while launching into either pond. However, most watercraft did have aquatic plants on them while they were retrieving from the ponds. And this year it did seem like there was quite a bit of growth, so that does make a lot of sense. Eurasian Watermilfoil and eelgrass were the most commonly found plants on the watercraft for the trailers. The boat launch stewards found most of the aquatic plants on motorboats, which was probably due to there being more pieces of equipment protruding into the water compared to other watercraft types. Now, we deemed the second year of the program to be successful in intercepting aquatic invasive species and educating the public on the issues surrounding aquatic invasive species. We found that the vast majority of visitors to Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond did seem excited to have the program there. And we even had people from the community go to the ponds who weren't even boating just to ask our stewards questions. And furthermore, visual inspections and hand removal of aquatic vegetation has been shown to be extremely effective at preventing aquatic invasive species from spreading to other bodies of water. So Lewis Creek Association's Boat Launch Steward program could potentially prevent both directly and indirectly aquatic invasive species from spreading to other uninfested water bodies. And Lewis Creek Association also intends to continue its stewardship program at Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond next summer and plans on incorporating volunteers into the program. So if any of you are interested in volunteering, either myself or Kate would love to talk to you, or if you guys have any ideas of how that could happen. So once again, I just wanted to stress that the most effective way of preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species is to clean, drain, and dry your watercraft and equipment. Yeah, so this program wouldn't have been possible without the funding that was provided by NEIWPCC in partnership with the Lake Champlain Basin Program. So I wanted to thank you for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
And nice sales pitch there at the end for the for volunteering for next year. I'll just elaborate on that a little bit. I think you guys were all aware, at least those of you are on the Monkton and Bristol Conservation Commissions, that we did submit a grant to the Lake Champlain Basin Program again for funding for our next year's Boat Launch Steward program, and intend to have that, continue at the two ponds much as it did this year. We also hope to involve the conservation commissions a little bit more, if possible, to get you guys out there to sort of see how the program works and incorporate like some sort of shadow days, if you will, in hopes that, in the future, you guys can help sort of usher this program along and encourage it a little bit. We also are planning to collaborate with the Department of Environmental Conservation. They have a team that I guess helps with aquatic invasive species, if you will, goes around and does some removal efforts and surveys on various lakes and ponds throughout Vermont. And they're hoping to come out and do some removal of the brittle naiad and the European frogbit at Bristol Pond. So if we're awarded this grant, hopefully we can do some collaboration with them and get volunteers from Bristol, Monkton, and anywhere else to come out and, just get a volunteer day in and get some of this stuff out of the pond where we can. Hopefully with the brittle naiad, the idea being that, it's early on in the spread of this plant, because it wasn't until this past year that it was seen there. So hopefully it's a fairly small patch or a small area that we can actually go in and remove it, or at least control, how far it spreads into that really important, it's a very ecologically sensitive and important area. So hopefully we'll see some of you out there this upcoming summer, and we can get some good work done on the ground. So questions, comments? Want more information?
I guess I have questions about the process itself. When you're at the site, you just wait for someone to come in, and then you ask them, I guess you'll train us, right? how to confront people, not with a gun. And
Yeah, Matt, do you want to take this one or? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, our stewards, like I said before, they are basically stationed there. Well, they are stationed there. They typically, sit in a couple of chairs. We have sandwich boards to inform people that we are actually there, and that explains kind of what we're doing and what our program is about and what species to look out for. And when people pull up, we usually get out of the chair, go over to them, initiate a conversation, ask them if we can inspect their boats. And we do this in various ways. Some people, it's best just to ask straight out, or, some people who are resistant, there are ways to, get them to let you inspect their boat. I mean, one of my favorite techniques is like, hey, do you mind if I clean your boat for free or something like that? And people are usually about that and allowing that. And so, yeah, and, the stewards are trained to do that, and they're trained to deliver an interpretive message. No two conversations are exactly alike. And it's nice too, because there's kind of this sense of community, because of at these smaller launches, it's a lot of times the same people over and over again. You got your regulars, so you build a rapport with them.
Did you say already what other places this program is happening at? Are there other places in Vermont that are doing this too? Or?
Yeah, so our program is only at Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond. Meg Modley, who's in this call, runs the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and they have a bunch of launches on Lake Champlain. And the state also has a public access breeder program as well, and they have breeders at quite a bit of ponds throughout the state.
Yeah, and I think there are some like privately funded breeder programs as well that are, at various lakes and ponds.
Yeah, some places have been doing, including Lake Champlain Basin Program, have been doing programs like this for many, many years, and have been very, very successful at running programs like this. And our program is modeled after Lake Champlain Basin Program's program. So
as far as removal of the invasive species, does your program liaison with, is Lewis Creek I think Lewis Creek does have volunteers who take invasive species out of water bodies, and are those programs related with grants and with process of how they organize it?
So Anne, we do some frog bite removal and other invasives removal in Charlotte and Shelburne, Town Farm Bay and Shelburne Bay, and that is a volunteer. It's all volunteers really who do the removal, with the exception of a paid intern or myself who helps, coordinate those days. And we have equipment, we have boats and, rakes and buckets and all the things that those volunteers need actually at the site. So people just have to show up really and hop in a boat. Those two programs are primarily funded by the towns of Shelburne and Charlotte. So we put into we call it our water quality stewardship program. And so Shelburne and Charlotte both help pay for the removal, as well as our water quality sampling efforts that go on in those towns. So, I guess in the future, if this was something that, we decided to continue to collaborate on with Bristol and Monkton, if we wanted to get involved with removal of frog bit in Bristol Pond or whatever it is, that may be something that we could talk about, if there was some way to get that into a town budget request, either through the Conservation Commission or directly in Charlotte. Now I go directly to the select board essentially with that request. So that, that could be a discussion that we have at some point in the future.
I might have missed it. I'm preparing to go to the select board in a few minutes, but and I can't even imagine if it's possible given the number of species there are, but is there some attempt to record the ratio of species, or how much is being taken out and how much is growing per year, or how much of the area is covered by invasive species? Is that kind of background information there?
Do you mean for Bristol, like for your area, or for the other areas I was talking about?
For Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond, I guess that the two areas that we're focusing on here, but
well, I know last year Matt did surveys of both Bristol and Monkton Pond as part of like a prior grant that funded both the boat launch Steward at Bristol Pond and surveys of Lewis Creek for aquatic invasive species. And as part of that, he did a bunch of like, I don't know what you call them, like rake pulls out of the pond. So like dropping a rake in and pulling it up and seeing what plants were on it, and ranked those like from 1 to 4 based on sort of coverage of plants on the rake, and did like hundreds of points, Matt. I don't even remember, like 250 points or something around each pond. So we have some pretty good data on what he found there last year. And as I mentioned, he didn't find any brittle naiad like 2 summers ago. So so it was interesting that this year it popped up both for our stewards and for DEC, who apparently also found it out there this year. So
yeah, it'd be interesting to track them over time.
mm-hmm.
Hopefully someone will disappear.
I know for our frog bit in Charlotte that it's really gone down quite a bit. Like it was something like 50% of the bay was covered when they started doing the program, and now we're down to like, I mean, it's very minimal. It's much less than 5% coverage every summer. So that's like positive.
Good work.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see your results.
Yeah. Meg, did you want to pipe in?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Matt to share with the group. I think one of the most critical pieces we think about with the boat launch steward program is there's all these different pathways by which aquatic invasive species can move across the landscape. And so the number one mechanism, which I think is relevant for both Bristol and Monkton Pond, is overland transports on boats, trailers, and recreational equipment. Much less likely to get bait fish introduction, although it's possible. And you need to keep in mind sort of aquarium dumping and cultural release types of pathways as well. But for overland transport on boats and trailers, thinking about where the sources of the invasives are and where they're coming from, and looking at the data, you can see in the charts that he shared in the presentation that you're seeing more invasive species coming in, I believe, to Bristol Pond on watercraft and trailers, and more invasive species leaving Monkton Pond on watercraft and equipment. So thinking about the fact that it might be that there are different and more people using Bristol Pond, and thinking about where they come from. And I know Matt knows that data, and it's important to know where your watercraft are coming from, if they're out of state, if they're coming from Lake Champlain primarily. And even though we have 51 known non-native and invasive species in Lake Champlain, really only about 12 or 13 of those 51 are over the fence line I call from non-native to invasive. So only about 13 of those are causing some kind of economic or environmental harm that we're able to measure. So it's really critical to have this data, and the data that's collected has been a figment of decades of managers thinking about what data to collect consistently over time. And so it's really great to have more lakes participating. And currently, in terms of the Vermont State Breeder Program, there are 32 programs in the state. A lot of those lake associations are funding those programs, and they apply for the grant and aid program at Vermont DEC, but Vermont DEC is only able to fund about 15 to 20% of the amount of requests that they're asked for. And the way that they fund is, instead of funding whole programs, they literally fund 20% of your program. So a lot of these programs have some state subsidy, but the majority of it is by user fee, user or lake association dues is helping to pay for the stewardship if they're not volunteering. And Matt, I don't know if you have anything to add about where boats are coming from to Bristol or to Monkton to point out sort of where the threats are coming from, but also thinking about where your species might be going to.
Yeah, there seems, and all this data we can share with everybody as well. We have a report that we made from this year, and we have one from last year too. So we can definitely send those around, but it's most of there's a lot of exchange between Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond, interestingly. A lot of times people will go from Monkton Pond to Bristol Pond even within the same day. And I would say probably the vast majority between the interchange or exchange between the two would be from Lake Champlain, which a lot of boats go to from Bristol Pond or Monkton Pond, or come to Bristol Pond and Monkton Pond from. But we did have this year some boats all the way from Arizona. So
Oh my God.
boats travel far. People love to fish and recreate on the water. So as long as these plants or animals are staying viable, they could potentially be a threat, which is why it's extremely important to clean, drain, and dry your boat. I know, like spiny water fleas, fish hook water fleas, zebra mussels, they're tiny. The veligers, which are essentially the young or juveniles of the zebra mussels, are tiny and can survive in a drop of water. So it's really important to practice proper boat hygiene. If I don't think that's the right word, but
Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Well, I was starting to think about the stuff moving between ponds, and I was wondering how many of these species can be carried on wildlife, like water birds, from even the areas that we're looking at to smaller areas that aren't even monitored.
yeah, that's a pretty common question, and a lot of people who I found in my experience being out on the launches, a lot of people don't like to take or give humans the responsibility of spreading aquatic invasive species. So they always, a lot of times, will use or bring that up. Birds can spread aquatic invasive species.
I know it's mostly.
Yeah, but it's much more likely that a human would be able to spread them. I mean, obviously a great blue heron or a duck going from one water body to another water body could indeed spread aquatic invasive species. However, human transport is much more rapid, and it's so it's a lot easier. Basically, it's a lot easier to spread from human activities, and all the research also points to humans as being the #1 vector of spread. Yeah.
No, I understand that part, but I'm wondering, are all of these species, is it possible for all of these species to be spread by wildlife, or only some of them? I don't know how
Yeah.
fine the mechanism is. Do you need a piece that's 6 feet long, like wrapped up in a propeller, or can it be just like a little chute?
I see. Yeah, most of these species, in particular plant species, can be spread via fragments. So you don't need much of a plant to actually cause an infestation. So even a little piece of Eurasian Watermilfoil, if the conditions are right, it could easily turn into a infestation, unfortunately, which makes controlling them kind of hard too.
Yeah, that's scary. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for the question.
Although
Matt,
to your
the one
point,
thing, sorry, the one thing I'd add to Matt's answer is that the scientific research is showing us that where we're seeing new invasion, so it's not only just that something's introduced, it has to actually take off, it has to grow, it has to reproduce. And so it's about propagule pressure. We don't have to get heavy into science, but basically most of the new invasions we're finding at boat launches, whether they're plants or animals, and the animals that we're thinking of are usually zebra mussels or quagga mussels. The fish are going to swim, the plankton are going to float. If there are, I guess birds can move from water body to water body, and they usually, if they're carrying a little piece of a plant, even if it could survive and it falls off in the middle of a deep lake, it's probably not going to take. So I think, yeah, thinking about the relative threat there, I think these species would be way more widespread if waterfowl was the primary way that they were spreading.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably no accident that most of these invasives are right by the boat launch, right? When you first find them. Because if it was spread by, animals and birds, then they'd be distributed all around the ponds.
Well, any more questions?
I have, during your presentation, there was one type of spreading that you defined it once and it went over my head, and then you were using it later, and I seen this a little quiet. It was is it triene, or what was that one? That the frog something?
A turian.
Turian.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
Can you say what that was again?
Yeah, so basically, the easiest, most simplistic way that I can think of it, and maybe Meg has a better way of describing it, is it's basically could be like a seed pod that will float to the bottom and then float to the bottom in the winter time, and then will float back up in the springtime to reproduce.
I want to follow up on something you said about the zebra mussels being tiny, having some aspect of their development that can be spread. I kind of got lost on that one. But even in a drop of water, you said. So if you're swimming and you're around zebra mussels, can these little microscopic or whatever particles be transported from your, I don't know, your swimming things? I mean, I just.
Yeah, they could be, if you have the opportunity to either change your clothes, or if you have a personal flotation device, if you, rinse it in hot water, I believe it's 120 degrees, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, Meg. It will kill them. So, it's very important to make sure you are decontaminating essentially all of your equipment, because of fish and line. Anything from a fish and line to your personal flotation device can serve as a method of spreading some type of aquatic invasive species. Not the fish and line example wouldn't necessarily be for zebra mussels, but spiny water fleas and fishhook water fleas can get attached to your fish and line. So
I guess I was more specifically interested in swimming. How if I'm spreading, I swim. Should your towels be washed in hot water? I mean, can you spread if you go to another?
It's very unlikely. I mean, you need to take precautions. I think we mostly are worried about scuba diving, wetsuits, where we have a great surface area that could hold moisture and carry something. If you're going to jump in and out of the water, it's very unlikely a zebra mussel or a veliger is going to become attached to you. If you have something that's going to sit in the water for a while, like weeks to months, you're going to see like the bottom of the boats become encrusted with zebra mussels. Or if you throw a shopping cart into Burlington Bay and you take it out a few weeks later, it will probably have some growth on it.
Okay, so the actual zebra mussels have to attach to it.
Yeah, and the veligers are small, they're microscopic. And basically what we're concerned about as boat launch stewards and looking at watercraft and equipment is anything below the water line or anything that comes into contact with the water or holds water could have viable veligers in it. So that if your bilge water has leftover Lake Champlain water, your motor or your bait bucket, for example, those would be pools of water we're concerned about. It's about flushing them out or spraying them down with hot water to kill them. And the high pressure hot water has been proven across the country, basically focused on the mussels, the zebra and quagga mussels, but has effect against a huge range of invasive species taxa. So our primary points here are going to be draining all the water, flushing it out. And then if we're uncertain, we're going to spray you down with hot water. Not your body, but your equipment.
And then if the equipment is dry for a reasonable amount of time, then that would tend to be effective as well.
Desiccation works really well for almost all taxa. The challenge is what's dry. Dry is dry, and it's a combination of heat and humidity. And a lot of people are like, oh, a few days drying. Well, in a wet November Lake Champlain Basin climate, 3 days is not necessarily dry. But yes, if things get fully dried out, it's unlikely that anything would become viable again.
Makes sense.
I had a question. Do you guys have hot water at these, your people have hot water there, like high pressure hot water?
For our program, we unfortunately don't. For the Lake Champlain Basin Program, they do have these really great machines that they use to decontaminate boats and stuff. But unfortunately, that's not within our budget.
So Caroline, there are a number of what we call decontamination stations, and they look like pressure washers basically. And some of them are 400-gallon tank units that have high pressure and hot water available. So when we encounter a high risk watercraft, and there are actually very few of them in Lake Champlain, because most of the people who recreate or boat in Lake Champlain are returning to Lake Champlain. And if you're just coming in and out of Lake Champlain, we consider you a low risk. But if you're coming out of Lake Champlain and then going to Bristol Pond or to some other water body, then we say, okay, that's high risk. We're going to try and spray you down and flush you out. We don't have enough of those units up yet. New York is very far ahead of us right now. They've got 7 decon stations armoring the New York side of Lake Champlain, and then a very intricate network of stewardship and decontamination stations throughout the Adirondack Park, and it's growing throughout the state. They also have state investment of $9 million over 5 years to support that program just in the Adirondack region. So they are pretty flush with resources to address that. Unfortunately, in the state of Vermont, as most of you are aware, we have one person at the state, Kim Jensen, who focuses on invasive species. And she has a number of techs if she's lucky in a given season. So we don't have a huge state budget, and it's supplemented by efforts by lake associations like Lewis Creek Association, the Lake Champlain Basin Program, the Nature Conservancy, but we need more staff and more resources in the state to launch a program like that. But I have to say that the really super coolest thing about all of this is that we're all collecting the same data. So if you're on Lake Champlain, if you're on Bristol or Monkton, or if you're in Quebec, we're funding programs that are collecting all the same data, so we can look at the data and figure out relative risks. So like, where are invasion spread hubs for lakes? Where's the most traffic coming and going from? So if somebody were to deliver 1 million plus and say, okay, go hit your highest risk locations, we have the data to start telling us where to go. And that's how we prioritize stewardship on Lake Champlain and where to put those few decontamination stations that we have.
Great. Are you taking samples of the uncommon invasives? I know you can trace them genetically to see how they're spreading around, and while it might not be affordable right now, it might be informative at some point, like some master student or something.
Are you talking about less common invasive species that are like maybe not here, early detection? Or do you mean
yeah, here or just detected? And if they're traveling around like between Montreal and here, or from Arizona or here, it would be interesting at some point to see the trajectory.
Yeah, we are using some early detection monitoring with environmental DNA analysis, which is collecting water samples to just say, is there any presence of, it may not be a living organism, but of an organism of interest, whether that's rare, threatened, endangered, or invasive that you're concerned about. And it's a challenging field of science because I think a lot of lake associations are waking up to eDNA, and it's really neat, except we have to really understand what the management implications are when you get a positive detection. A lot of people are like, okay, we have something, we got to go, we got to get in the water. And most often it actually means like, no, we need to take more spatial and temporal samples and see how many other positives we get. Otherwise you're a needle in the haystack. So yes, there is some investigation into doing that, especially for our high priority watch species that we don't have here yet, like quagga mussel, round goby, hydrilla, a plant, a fish, and a mussel that we're the most concerned about right now. But it's not systematic. And again, it would probably cost over a few $1 million to launch something routinely to get enough data to be able to target some kind of effective response.
It would, but even if you take samples of, say you see a new one and you put it in alcohol, at some point that could be extremely valuable.
Yes.
I see a question from Jamie in the chat asking about similarities to management for terrestrial invasives, for example, harvesting before turions and seeds form. Matt, do you want to take that one too?
Sorry, I couldn't get my computer unmuted. In the case of frog bit, it's really important to catch it before those turions form and fall down or sink down to the bottom, because of essentially those plants that are up on the top of the water, they're going to die anyways. So basically you're just doing the same thing over and over again if you don't without making an impact, if you don't actually catch that. At Town Farm Bay in Lake Champlain and Charlotte and Ferrisburg, the Lewis Creek Association has been very successful with their volunteer program. It's quite amazing, even seeing the difference from the few years that I've helped out with that, the reduction of frog bit. And there's this thing called like the invasive species curve. If you catch things early enough, you have a much better chance of eradicating them and preventing them from spreading within a water body. However, if you miss that opportunity, then they're much more difficult to manage for or get rid of. And it's very unlikely you're actually going to eradicate them from the system. And after that, it's just either dealing with it or managing it to just prevent it from either spreading to other places or just to try to reduce the amount of it in that water body.
And is the strategy similar in that you would work from the light infestation toward the core of it to contain it, or do you, like a seed-based plant? I'm thinking, if you have, for example, wild parsnip, if you can contain that one plant that's ready to drop 500 seeds, that's a big win. But if you're in a patch of them, then it's a multi-year process anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kate might be more qualified to talk about this aspect because she has much more experience in the actual harvesting of the plants. But in the case of frog bit, it's kind of just you grab as much as you can see, and we focus kind of on certain areas every year just to kind of keep it from spreading. But did you want to say anything about that, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think it probably depends a little bit on how the plant spreads otherwise too. So if you look at like some plants also spread by fragmentation or by like the roots spreading out, like on yellow iris, for example, you might be able to dig a little bit of it, but if you leave a little fragment, that can grow and then spread more.
Right.
I guess I don't know much about like where you start as far as like starting with the light part of the infestation versus the heavy part. My inclination is always like just get in there and start getting
Get it all.
out, but
Yeah.
Meg might be able to speak
Makes
to that
sense.
a little bit more. But yeah, I think, with some of these, it is hard to control, like stuff like milfoil, for example, where, it just
Right.
like it fragments and you can pull it, but in the process of pulling it, you're making 10 fragments of that plant that go floating around.
Right.
It becomes
So seed-based is easier then or durian-based because, you pull the plant before that happens and the plant itself is not a problem necessarily. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with milfoil, it also depends on, what's the size of the population. So if it's widespread and rather dense in areas, you want to target your management around the highest use locations. So like the public access, the launches, thick beds that there's often a lot of traffic through that might churn up and create more fragments. But I have been in situations where there's so few plants because it's an early detection that literally hand harvesting with scuba or snorkeling is effective at just get rid of what's there.
Nice.
We have a really dense population of water chestnut in the southern end of Lake Champlain. It's an annual floating aquatic plant, which makes it a very manageable plant because the seeds, if you can get the plant before the seeds drop, then you're removing that source of next year's growth. So we have been for decades and decades and decades managing water chestnut in Lake Champlain. We prioritize the northernmost satellite populations, which could be small or large, while maintaining an ongoing mechanical and hand harvesting management in the southern end of the lake, where we have like the putting green from New York to Vermont of water chestnut beds, but it's a huge success program. So I guess it depends.
Okay. Helps me understand. Thanks.
This is kind of off the wall, but can you eat water chestnuts?
Sure can. They don't taste great. I have. They're not like the ones you have in your stir fry typically. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to try all of them just to see what they taste like. They're not very good usually.
You're still alive. Yeah, there's a website called Eat the Invaders.
I know that I don't know if it has an invasive species status, but orange daylily is very popular in Chinese cuisine.
Yeah, it's actually good.
Well, shall we close with a food item so you guys can all go eat your dinners?